He said his ex was a woman from a show called Suits. I didn't know what the show was. I didn't know the woman. Months later, I see pictures in Us Weekly of Harry's dating someone, and I text him to be like, is this your ex?
A wave of explosive allegations is sending shockwaves across the world, as claims about Meghan's past resurface in the most dramatic way imaginable. Reports suggest her ex-husband has come forward with revelations that are leaving audiences stunned and deeply divided. At the center of it all, Prince Harry is said to be overwhelmed, sparking intense speculation about the truth behind these accusations. But what is fact? What is rumor? And why is this story emerging now with such force, threatening to reshape everything people thought they knew? And do you really believe Meghan could abandon her child with her ex because she wanted to be a royal? Let us know in the comments. To help us create more videos and reveal the real world, please subscribe so more people can discover this. A love built on belief, not just emotion. At the center of this growing tension lies a love story that once seemed solid and unbreakable. It did not look like an ordinary relationship, nor did it sound like one when Prince Harry spoke about Meghan Markle. His words were never light or casual. They carried weight, depth, and a quiet intensity that suggested something far more meaningful than romance. To him, this was not just about love. It felt like finding safety, like finally being seen, understood, and perhaps even saved. Long before Meghan entered his life, Harry had already shared glimpses of a different reality, one that was not always as privileged or secure as many imagined. In his widely watched 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey, he spoke with surprising honesty. He described feeling trapped, but in a way that was almost invisible to him at the time. It was not a physical prison, but something more psychological, something shaped by duty, expectation, and a system that had always defined who he was supposed to be. He also spoke about grief, deep, lingering grief that had never fully settled. The loss of his mother, Princess Diana, was not just a childhood tragedy. It was something that continued to echo through his adult life. That pain, left unresolved, shaped how he saw the world and his place within it. He suggested that growing up in the royal environment did not necessarily prepare him to deal with such emotions. Instead, it left gaps, emotional spaces where understanding, healing, and expression should have been. And then, Meghan arrived. Her arrival marked a turning point, bringing Harry clarity and a sense of freedom. He deeply believed in her and embraced a new way of life. This belief led him to step away from royal duties, break long-standing traditions, and create distance from his family, all in pursuit of what he saw as truth. To Harry, Meghan symbolized honesty and clarity. She represented an escape from a life he had often described as restrictive. Through her, he seemed to find a voice he felt he had long been denied. And so, his actions, no matter how dramatic they appeared to others, felt justified to him. They were not just about love. They were about aligning his life with what he believed to be real and right. This is what gave their relationship its strength. It was not built only on affection, but on conviction. It carried a sense of purpose, almost like a shared mission to redefine their lives on their own terms. But that same foundation also carried a hidden risk. When a relationship is rooted not just in love, but in belief, especially the belief that one person represents truth itself, it becomes delicate in a different way. Love can survive disagreements, misunderstandings, and even distance. But belief, once shaken, is harder to repair. Because belief is absolute. It does not easily allow for doubt. And when even the smallest crack appears in that kind of foundation, it rarely stays contained. It grows, quietly at first, then more visibly. Questions begin to form. Certainty begins to fade. What once felt solid can start to feel uncertain. That is the paradox at the heart of their story. What made their bond so powerful? The depth of trust, the strength of belief, the sense of rescue and renewal is also what makes it vulnerable. How did Meghan become so instrumental in Harry's life? Could it be her experience from her previous marriage? What did her ex-husband say that affected Harry? Let's find out. The silence that spoke louder than words. For many years, there was a man whose presence in one of the world's most talked-about stories was almost invisible. His name is Trevor Engelson, a Hollywood producer who once lived a very different life alongside Meghan Markle, long before her name echoed across continents and headlines became a daily storm. While the world watched the rise of a global figure, dissecting every detail through interviews, documentaries, and endless media debates, Trevor chose a path that stood in sharp contrast to the noise. He remained quiet. Not forgotten, but quiet. And this wasn't the kind of silence that comes from being overlooked or pushed aside. It wasn't the silence of someone who had nothing to say. No, this was something far more striking. His silence felt intentional, carefully chosen, almost like a decision made with full awareness of its weight. It carried a sense of control, as though every word he chose not to speak mattered just as much as anything he could have said. Over the years, opportunities came knocking, not small ones, big, life-changing offers, invitations to speak publicly, exclusive interviews that promised to shift public opinion overnight, deals reportedly worth millions, all centered on one thing: his side of the story, a chance to reveal what the world believed it had only partially understood. But each time, he refused. He didn't step forward to defend himself. He didn't try to correct narratives or challenge what was being said. He didn't criticize Meghan, nor did he attempt to draw attention back to himself. In a world where people often rush to speak, to explain, to be heard, he did the exact opposite. He stepped back, and he stayed there. That kind of restraint is rare. In fact, it's almost unsettling, because when someone consistently chooses silence in the face of attention, curiosity begins to grow. People start to wonder, not just about what is being hidden, but why it's being held back in the first place. What does a man know that makes him turn away from fame, from money, from the power of telling his own story? It's a question that doesn't fade easily. Instead, it grows louder over time, because silence, especially when it stretches across years, stops feeling empty. It begins to feel heavy, like it's carrying something beneath the surface, something unspoken, something intentionally left unsaid. And the longer it lasts, the more it invites speculation. Was it dignity? Was it strategy? Or was it something deeper? Something that words, once spoken, could never fully contain again? For a long time, there were no answers, just quiet, just distance, just a man who seemed to have walked away completely from a story that had moved forward without him. And then, something shifted. By early 2026, subtle changes began to emerge. Not dramatic announcements or bold public statements. Nothing so obvious. Instead, there were whispers. Small, almost unnoticeable movements of information. Fragments that seemed to surface quietly without a clear source. Stories that felt like they were being told, but not directly. It was as though something long buried was beginning to find its way out, but without being openly claimed. And suddenly, that long-standing silence didn't feel the same anymore. It no longer felt like absence. It felt active, alive even. For the first time in years, people began to sense that Trevor Engelson's silence might not have been about stepping away at all. Perhaps it had been about waiting, watching, choosing the right moment, or maybe choosing no moment at all and letting time do what words could not. Because sometimes, silence is not the lack of a voice. Sometimes it is the most powerful form of communication. And when it finally begins to shift, even slightly, it can say more than words ever could. How could Meghan have hidden such from Harry? Who did she date before Harry? Was she so desperate to win his heart that she hid it from him? Let's delve into the details of Meghan's love that faded gracefully. The chapter before Harry. After the dust of her divorce had finally settled, quietly stepped into a new chapter of her life, one that, at the time, seemed far removed from the global spotlight she would later inhabit. It was during this period of transition that she reportedly found companionship in a well-known Canadian chef with a rising profile in the culinary world. Their relationship, though not overly publicized in its early stages, gradually became known. What began as a connection between two individuals navigating their own professional and personal paths soon developed into something deeper. The pair dated for roughly 2 years. a significant stretch of time that suggested not just casual interest, but genuine emotional investment. At one point, their bond appeared strong enough that they chose to live together, a step that often signals comfort, trust, and a shared vision, at least for the near future. From the outside, their relationship seemed grounded and relatively stable. There was no dramatic spectacle, no obvious signs of turbulence that typically attract media frenzy. Instead, it unfolded quietly, almost deliberately shielded from excessive public scrutiny. Yet, as is often the case with relationships, especially those involving individuals in the public eye, things did not last forever. Reports indicate that the two eventually parted ways, and interestingly, their split occurred not long before Meghan's life took a dramatically different turn, just before she met. This timing has since sparked curiosity and speculation, as people often look back and try to connect the dots between past relationships and future outcomes. However, what stands out more than the timing is the tone with which Cory Vitiello later spoke about their time together. In 2018, during an interview with the E!, he offered a rare glimpse into his perspective, one marked not by resentment or regret, but by respect and restraint. Vitiello's words carried a sense of maturity that is not always common in conversations about former relationships, particularly when one party has gone on to achieve extraordinary global attention. He made it clear that he did not wish to insert himself into Meghan's evolving narrative in a way that might appear self-serving. In his view, attempting to position himself as part of her story, especially after her life had taken such a high-profile turn, would feel opportunistic, as though he were trying to benefit from her fame. Instead, he chose a different path, one of quiet dignity. He openly expressed his respect for Meghan, describing her as a great girl, a simple yet sincere acknowledgement that spoke volumes. There was no trace of bitterness in his tone, no subtle jabs or hidden criticisms. Rather, his comments reflected a man who had made peace with the past and who understood the importance of allowing people to move forward without unnecessary complications. Perhaps even more telling was his emphasis on privacy. Despite Meghan's increasing presence in the public eye, Vitiello maintained that certain aspects of life, especially personal relationships, deserve to be handled with care and discretion. He acknowledged that while she had, by circumstance and choice, become part of a global conversation, he still believed in respecting the boundaries of her private life. It was a quiet but firm stance, one that highlighted his values more than any headline ever could. In many ways, his response added an unexpected layer of depth to the story. Rather than fueling gossip or adding drama, it subtly reminded observers that behind every widely discussed figure is a history of real relationships, real emotions, and real people who choose, in their own ways, how to respond to the past. And so, while Meghan Markle's life would soon take a turn that placed her at the center of worldwide attention, her chapter with Cory Vitiello remains a quieter, more understated part of her journey, one defined not by scandal or spectacle, but by mutual respect, timing, and the simple reality that not every meaningful relationship is meant to last forever. How was the cat let out of the bag? How did Harry react to the revelation? Let's dive into the details of Harry's reaction to Meghan's leaked secret. The week everything shifted. January 2026 did not arrive with noise, drama, or breaking news alerts. It slipped in quietly, almost unnoticed. There were no bold headlines, no urgent updates flashing across screens. Yet, beneath that calm surface, something significant was beginning to unfold. Inside their home in Montecito, the atmosphere had started to shift. It wasn't the kind of change that needed an official statement or public announcement. It was subtler than that. Something you could sense if you paid close attention. A difference in rhythm, a change in presence, the kind of shift that reveals itself not through words, but through absence. Prince Harry, once known for his boldness, clarity, and willingness to speak openly, seemed to retreat into himself. The man who had once stepped forward with confidence, addressing the world, sharing his truth, standing firmly beside his choices, was now slowly pulling back. His public appearances became fewer, then rare, and eventually, they stopped altogether. The interviews that once gave insight into his thoughts and experiences, gone. The carefully crafted messages that used to appear with consistency, they faded, one by one, until there was nothing left but silence. But this silence did not feel calm. It did not feel resolved. It felt unsettled. There was a noticeable difference between this quiet withdrawal and the kind of silence people had seen before in similar situations. This wasn't the silence of someone at peace. It carried a certain tension, a quiet restlessness, as though something beneath the surface was still moving, still searching for an answer. Those familiar with the situation began to notice unusual patterns. Harry was reportedly spending more time alone, often choosing isolation over interaction. Long hours were spent in his study, away from distractions, away from conversation, away even from the routines that once defined his daily life. And then there were the drives. He was said to be driving through the Santa Barbara hills at odd hours, late into the night or very early in the morning. These were not casual outings or routine trips. These were moments chosen carefully, at times when the world is at its quietest, when there are no voices, no interruptions, only space and thought. It is in such silence that the mind often becomes loudest. During these solitary drives, one could only imagine the weight of reflection, the kind of thinking that does not happen in busy rooms or public spaces, but in stillness, when every memory, every decision, every unanswered question begins to rise to the surface. And then came what many would later see as the clearest sign of all. Harry began to ask questions. Not simple, passing questions, not the kind asked out of mild curiosity or fleeting interest. These were deeper, more focused, more deliberate, the kind of questions that suggest a search, not just for information, but for understanding. More specifically, his attention seemed to turn toward Meghan's past. This, in itself, marked a clear shift. For years, Prince Harry had stood firmly and visibly by Meghan's side. He had defended her against criticism from the media, from the public, and even from within royal circles. He had made it clear time and again that he was not just her partner, but her protector, someone fully committed, unwavering in his support. He had spoken with conviction. He had acted with certainty. There had been no visible hesitation. But now, something was different. According to those close enough to observe the change, Harry was no longer operating from that same place of unquestioning defense. The energy had shifted. The certainty that once defined his stance seemed to be giving way to something else, something more complex, something more searching. He was no longer just standing guard. He was looking deeper, trying to piece things together, trying to understand details that perhaps had never seemed important before, trying perhaps to reconcile what he believed with what he was beginning to question. And that is where the real change lay, because there is a powerful difference between defending something you believe in and beginning to examine it. One is rooted in certainty, the other begins with doubt. And in that quiet Montecito home, far from the noise of cameras and public opinion, it seemed that Prince Harry had crossed that invisible line. He was no longer simply defending the story he had helped tell the world. He was now, in his own quiet way, trying to understand it. Has there been rumors of Meghan's secret before the revelation confirmed it? How much information lingers about Meghan, and how much is true? Let's find out. Rumors, reality, and the power of doubt. It is important to slow down at this point and draw a clear line between two very different things: what can be proven and what is simply felt. During this period, many claims began to circulate, some of them dramatic and deeply personal. Stories surfaced about Meghan's past, rumors of earlier relationships, whispers of possible undisclosed marriages, and suggestions of chapters in her life that were never made public. Yet, despite how widely these stories spread, careful investigations and fact-checking efforts have found no strong or reliable evidence to support many of these allegations. From a strictly factual point of view, these claims remain uncertain. They sit in a gray area, neither confirmed nor entirely dismissed, but lacking the solid proof needed to be accepted as truth. However, human emotions do not always operate on the same rules as facts, because emotionally, certainty is not always necessary for something to have a powerful effect. Doubt, once it enters the mind, does not pause to ask for evidence. It does not wait patiently for verification. Instead, it takes root quietly and begins to grow, often expanding far beyond the original question that introduced it. For Harry, the central issue may not have been whether these claims were true or false. The deeper and more unsettling realization may have been something far more personal, the awareness that there were aspects of Meghan's life he did not fully know, questions he had never thought to ask, details he may never have felt the need to explore. And that kind of realization can be profoundly disturbing. To understand this, imagine building your life around a single, clear narrative, a story that gives meaning to your choices, shapes your identity, and justifies the sacrifices you have made. This narrative becomes a foundation, something stable, something you trust. Now imagine discovering that this story might be incomplete, not necessarily wrong, not necessarily built on lies, but incomplete. That subtle difference matters, because something does not need to be false to feel unsettling. The mere possibility that there are missing pieces, unknown details, untold stories, can be enough to create a sense of imbalance. It introduces uncertainty into what once felt certain, and that alone can be deeply unsettling. One reported statement captures the emotional weight of such a moment. "I gave up my country for a version of you that might not exist." Whether those exact words were ever spoken is almost beside the point. What matters is the feeling behind them. They reflect a state of emotional confusion, a sense of disorientation that can occur when someone begins to question the foundation of their decisions. It suggests the inner struggle of a person trying to reconcile past choices with present uncertainty. A man looking back at the sacrifices he made, leaving behind familiar structures, traditions, even identity, and wondering whether those choices were based on a complete understanding of the person he trusted most. That kind of internal conflict is not easy to resolve, because it is no longer just about another person. It is no longer simply about Meghan, her past, or the truth of any specific claim. It becomes something far more personal. It becomes about Harry himself, his sense of judgment, his trust in his own decisions, and ultimately, his sense of identity. When doubt enters at that level, it does not just question external facts. It begins to challenge internal stability. Who am I if the story I believed in is uncertain? What do my choices mean if they were built on something incomplete? Can I still trust my own judgment moving forward? These are not simple questions, and they do not have easy answers. In moments like this, the real struggle is not about proving or disproving rumors. It is about navigating the emotional weight of uncertainty. It is about coming to terms with the possibility that life is more complex than the narratives we create to understand it. And perhaps most importantly, it is about finding a way to rebuild a sense of self, even when the story that once defined it no longer feels whole. How did the palace respond to the revelation? How much could it have affected the unity of the royal family? Let's dig into the details of the royal family in the midst of duty, discipline, and division. The royal response. As tensions quietly intensified across California, the impact did not remain confined to one place. Like ripples spreading across still water, the effects traveled far beyond American borders, eventually reaching the United Kingdom. And when the royal family responded, they did not do so with loud statements or dramatic gestures. Instead, their reaction carried a different kind of weight, measured, deliberate, and deeply intentional. At the heart of this response stood Princess Anne. Unlike many figures in the public eye who rely on interviews, headlines, or carefully crafted appearances to communicate their views, Princess Anne has built her reputation on something far more enduring: consistency. Over the years, she has become known for her disciplined approach to duty, her unwavering sense of responsibility, and a quiet authority that does not demand attention, but commands respect nonetheless. When she acts or speaks, it is rarely for show. Every movement carries purpose, and every position reflects careful thought. In this situation, her reported stance was neither vague nor uncertain. It was clear, firm, and rooted in personal accountability. From her perspective, Prince Harry made his own decisions, freely and consciously. He was not cornered, pressured, or controlled by the institution he chose to step away from. Instead, he actively pursued independence. He expressed a strong desire to shape his own life, to define his own path outside the long-standing traditions of royal duty. That freedom, according to this view, was granted. His marriage, his direction, and the life he now leads, these are, in essence, his responsibility. To suggest otherwise, from Princess Anne's standpoint, raises difficult questions. It challenges the very idea of personal responsibility that Prince Harry himself once appeared to value. And for someone like Anne, whose life has been guided by duty and accountability, such a contradiction does not sit easily. Yet, beyond questions of blame or decision-making, her deeper concern lies elsewhere. It is not simply about what has happened, but about what will follow. The consequences of public conflict can stretch far into the future. Words spoken today can echo for years. Actions taken in moments of tension can shape perceptions for a lifetime. Princess Anne is said to have placed strong emphasis on the need for stability, particularly for the younger generation caught in the middle of such highly visible circumstances. Her reported view highlights a simple but powerful truth. No matter how complex adult disagreements may become, however, within the royal family itself, unity on this matter was far from certain. Queen Camilla, for instance, is believed to have responded with notable intensity. Her reaction cannot be separated from her own personal history, one shaped by years of public scrutiny, criticism, and the difficult process of rebuilding both image and trust. For her, discussions around past decisions and openness are not abstract ideas. They carry deeply personal meaning. As a result, conversations within the royal circle reportedly became layered and emotionally charged. What may have appeared as a simple disagreement on the surface revealed itself to be something far more complex, a reflection of differing perspectives on accountability, transparency, and the realities of living under constant public observation. The tension, therefore, was not limited to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle alone. It expanded into a broader and more challenging question. How should an institution as historic and symbolic as the royal family respond when personal struggles unfold so publicly? How does it balance tradition with modern expectations, privacy with transparency, and individual freedom with collective responsibility? At the center of this delicate and evolving situation stands King Charles III. His position is perhaps the most complex of all. He is not only a father navigating a deeply personal family matter, but also a monarch tasked with preserving the stability and image of an institution that represents continuity, heritage, and national identity. Every decision he makes must carefully weigh both roles, one guided by emotion, the other by duty. In times like these, there are no easy answers, only careful choices, quiet resilience, and the hope that, despite the tensions, a path forward can be found, one that honors both the responsibilities of the present and the legacy of the past. How much has Meghan's past weighed down their marriage? How much more could it affect the couple and the marriage? Let's find out. The weight of the past and the uncertainty of what comes next. What makes this story so powerful is not only the events that unfold, but what those events stand for beneath the surface. At first glance, it may seem like just another story about relationships, personal choices, and public attention. But when you look closer, you begin to see something deeper, something that touches on belief, trust, identity, and the quiet risks people take when they decide to share their life with someone else. At its core, this is not just a story about a marriage. It is a story about faith in another person. It is about choosing to trust someone with your time, your emotions, your future, and even your reputation. Trust is not given lightly. It is built slowly, often through shared experiences, honest moments, and mutual understanding. Yet, it can also be tested in ways that are unexpected and sometimes painful. For Harry, this journey has always been about seeking truth. From his perspective, truth represents freedom. It represents breaking away from what he felt was a life shaped by silence, control, and unspoken rules. His choice reflects a desire to live more openly, to speak more freely, to feel more deeply, and to exist in a way that feels authentic rather than restricted. To him, choosing truth is choosing honesty, and choosing honesty is choosing a better, more genuine life. But truth is not as simple as it first appears. Truth is not always a single, clear picture. It can be made up of many layers, different experiences, different interpretations, and different emotional responses. What feels true to one person may feel incomplete or even unfair to another. Sometimes, truth can be uncomfortable. It can challenge long-held beliefs, disrupt expectations, and force people to face realities they would rather avoid. When different versions of truth come together, they do not always align. Instead of bringing clarity, they can create tension. This tension is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it exists quietly in the background, shaping decisions, influencing actions, and affecting relationships in ways that are not immediately visible. Over time, this tension can grow, especially when it is not openly addressed or fully understood. Meanwhile, Trevor Engelson remains in a very different position. He is still connected to the story, even if he is not at its center. His life continues, as all lives do, moving forward, growing, and taking shape in its own direction. He builds his own future, raises his family, and focuses on his own path. Yet, despite this distance, he is not entirely removed from the narrative that once connected them. For the most part, he has chosen silence. He has not filled the public space with explanations or responses. Instead, he has remained quiet, allowing the story to unfold without his voice dominating the conversation. But silence is not always empty. Sometimes, silence speaks in ways that words cannot. It can suggest patience, restraint, or even strength. Now, however, that silence feels different. It carries a new kind of weight. The world is no longer simply wondering whether he will speak. Instead, people are beginning to ask whether he already has, just not in a way that was easy to recognize. Sometimes, communication is not loud or direct. It can be subtle, indirect, and only fully understood when looked at from a distance. In today's digital world, the past has a strange way of staying alive. It does not disappear as quickly as we might expect. Instead, it remains in the background, waiting. It lingers in old messages, forgotten posts, shared memories, and public records. And sometimes, when the timing is right, the past can return, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a quiet yet powerful form that can change how people see everything. This brings us to a difficult and important question. When the foundation of a story begins to shift, when the things people once believed start to feel uncertain, what should be done? Should we try to rebuild it, carefully putting the pieces back together in a stronger and more honest way? Or should we pause and ask ourselves whether the story was ever truly complete in the first place? This is not an easy question to answer, because it challenges everything we think we know. It forces us to examine not just the story itself, but our understanding of it. It asks us to consider whether we were seeing the full picture, or only a part of it. And it reminds us that sometimes, what we believe to be the end of a story is only a chapter within a much larger narrative. For everyone involved, one truth stands out clearly. The heaviest burden is not what is already known. Known truths, even when difficult, can be processed, understood, and eventually accepted. But what is not known, what is still hidden, carries a different kind of weight. It creates questions without answers, possibilities without clarity, and thoughts that linger without resolution. And perhaps that is what makes this story so compelling. Not just the events themselves, but the uncertainty that surrounds them. Not just what has been said, but what has been left unsaid. Because in the end, it is often the unknown that leaves the deepest mark. So what do you think about the revelation that made Harry emotional? Why do you think Meghan hid such from him? We'd love to hear your opinions in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe.